It takes 10 seconds of combat to fill. So what this means is this is gonna fill on its own. And like, dude, I think that's just too easy.
This is a take I've seen floating around quite a bit since the FanFest keynote, and now that the bald man has spoken, it seems a good time as any to talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Kurojakku. Difficulty is often a big point of contention in just about any MMO I've ever played, and especially so in Final Fantasy in the years following Dawntrail. Are jobs too easy? Would making them harder be too harsh on a casual audience? Is the new Evolve combat going to oversimplify combat too much, regardless what Yoshi P claims? Like and subscribe for more overanalyzing discussions, and feel free to join me in the comments.
Like, you can literally run away from the boss and your shit still fills, man. I think it should be harder. I think you should have to attack.
Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Let's just get this out of the way right now. Just because you can stand there and do nothing at all does not mean you should. These new gauges are basically glorified cooldowns with pretty graphics, and while yes, that in and of itself is something worth critiquing, you could extend the same argument to skills we already have. Sure, I could pop Living Shadow and let Esteem do all the work while I hit on the Astro Bunny Girl in the party, but that does not mean I will. I would hit on her in between GCDs like decorum demands, as I was raised with manners. Jokes aside, it's all love Zeems. You seem like a great guy and a perfectly adequate off-tank. That out of the way, let us return to the main topic of conversation, difficulty, or more specifically, job difficulty. This isn't so much about the fight designs themselves, but mostly focused on the jobs. Let's begin with what does not make things truly difficult, or more importantly, fun. It's not job gauges. Most of those are effectively a cooldown with extra steps. It's not your 1-2-3 melee combo being 3 different buttons instead of one single button. I've said this before and I'll say it again. There is no skill, nor degree of difficulty nor pleasure to be had from pressing the number 2 instead of pressing the number 1, much less the number 3. Especially since the combo just lights up which button to press next in sequence anyways. So it is a completely useless exercise that provides no skill check or additional fun whatsoever. As for the job gauges, there's very little effective difference between a gauge that builds by itself and one that builds passively through GCD uses. The only thing that really comes to mind are 1, being pushed out of melee range, thus getting no gauge at all. It is a minor skill check of if you can stay within melee uptime or not, but it's more annoying than engaging most of the time. And 2, deliberately not building up gauge when you may be about to overcap. For example, on Dark Knight, not finishing your 1-2-3 combo when your blood meter is high and delirium is about to be off cooldown. Now don't get me wrong, I don't want to see this overused with these new evolved reworks. If every damn gauge is turned into a building resource bar, it's going to get very, very old, very, very fast. And we will have a whole new breed of that sameness feeling across all jobs that we are already dealing with. I can't give a solid take when it comes to the Dragoon, which was talked about in the clip.
I think it should be harder.
As I don't really play it now, much less have any idea how it will compare to the new version. Though I am a fan of the flank positionals being divided into left and right flanks as opposed to just flanks. Again, please do not overuse this SE, and if the next melee we see has a passive gauge and 3 positionals, I'm gonna start to have some issues, but so far so good. Besides, with some exceptions, most gauges boil down to a very simple builder-spender resource, and I wouldn't exactly call that challenging or difficult. That being said, while I am concerned we may be approaching the realm of being too simple, I do see potential in new Paladin, even with its passive gauge mechanics. Now, a passive gauge is not too different from a cooldown. We've talked about this a couple times. Look at a skill like Shadowbringers. It has 2 charges, it's on a 60-second cooldown, and once one is used, the clock starts ticking for 1 charge at a time. This is almost precisely the same as what we see on Evolved Paladin, and in the context of Dawntrail Dark Knight, results in just treating this skill like a 2-minute cooldown and sinking all of it into your burst window at once. Yes, they will be removing burst windows, I am aware of this, but bear with me here. There's some slight min-maxing when it comes to getting cooldowns rolling on other skills first before using the second charge, but I digress. Where something like Shadowbringers differs from Evolved Paladin's Imperator gauge, as I'm going to choose to call it from now on, is that being tied to a gauge charge means that you start combat without your cooldown at all. I do wonder how this is going to play out in the long run, especially with the removal of party buffs and strict burst window timings. I can see a small gap form between players who just hit Imperator the moment it's available, and those who wait for both charges to be ready before using a pot and sending it all in that self-made burst window, assuming pots don't get reworked, of course. Meanwhile, in between pots, you'd likely just keep one charge in your pocket and do the bare minimum as to not overcap and gain no gauge at all. I suppose a constantly filling bar does sort of apply its own pressure in that way and asking you to use it before it fills up, so you do always have to keep it in the back of your mind and keep an eye on it, but that's no different than cooldowns anyways. Point being, there's a very small difference in actual skill between a gauge filling itself and a gauge built with your basic 1-2-3 combo. And if we're being completely honest with ourselves here, there isn't really a difficult job in Final Fantasy XIV. There is some degree of variation, sure. Some jobs are brain dead easy, you can turn your brain off and go do something else. It's called Warrior. Why do you think Xenos plays it?
Harder.
Just kidding. Other jobs take a lot more brain power to figure out initially up front, but the actual execution of a job is relatively light and simple to maintain and keep up with. The gap between the skill floor and the skill ceiling is rather small. So if we're going to sit here and talk about how jobs are going to get too easy with the new evolved combat, that's kind of just being dishonest with ourselves and pretending that we have hard jobs to play to begin with. It's the fight and the boss that makes the fight hard. It's not really your kit that makes anything a challenge at all. Now, what might actually add some complexity to your kit itself is mechanics that engage with the enemy directly. This can be things like mobility tools, like gap closers. This can be things like damage downs. Every DPS has one currently. This can be things like, in the context of New Dragoon, the new ultimate that it has, giving it a 90% damage reduction, potentially leading to some cheeky shenanigans. I am so ready to shirk my Dragoon just for fun. Even the off-tanks don't get to be off-tanks anymore. Wait a second, I play Dark Knight. Anyways, moving on. And when it comes to Paladin, there's the new Sheltron and counterattack to think of when we're talking about mechanics engaging with bosses. The closest thing we currently have in-game is Dark Knight's TBN, a short duration mitigation that rewards you for timing it right and knowing when to fish for a Dark Arts in between burst windows. Paladin's counter is a far better version of this idea since 1, it does not steal from a fucking offensive resource the way TBN does, nor does it seem to need to take a minimum amount of damage to pop the actual bubble, thus making it a net damage gain with a solid consistency and its own resource gauge that does not reduce your damage if you're not using the mitigation. I have a lot of problems with current TBN if you cannot tell. Yes, I know the bald off tank is going to start yapping again in about 2 seconds about how counter does not work if you aren't the main tank and blah 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 blah, but I'm like 95% certain cover will let you trigger your own Sheltron counters, assuming you put Sheltron on yourself and cover on the target taking a tank buster, whatever the hit is, thus making Paladin a perfectly viable at the off tank slot regardless. Another thing that comes to mind is this lasting satisfaction buff that you get after a perfect counter that we got no details about. Considering both Sheltron and Imperator have similar gauges, and hold the exact same amount of charges, it does make me wonder if that satisfaction buff will provide a temporary self-damage boost. This would give Paladin a neat little minigame where you will want to always be looking for counterattacks before every single Imperator burst while not wasting mitigations on meaningless hits leaving you exposed with nothing available. Simultaneously juggling your gauge, Imperator and defensive gauge both, to make sure neither overcaps and losing out on the damage altogether. A resource that only builds on combo GCDs or autos like current Paladin does really wouldn't apply that constant timer pressure the same way an ever-building meter does. Along with planning your other big mitigations around tank busters and important mechanics, and then needing to start looking for opportunities to do not 1 but 2 Sheltron counters inside of your own pot window without leaving you exposed, I can see how this seemingly oversimplified tank can get a lot more dynamic and have a wider skill gap than it may first appear. Perhaps I am delusional and smoking copious amounts of copium in the room. But this is precisely what I hope to see from a new combat overhaul. More dynamic combat, more decision making on which skill I'm going to use in what order as opposed to strict rigid rotations. This is actually why, even though I mostly play tank, I love playing Viper. Rattling Coil is such a simple ability, and all it does is hold 3 charges and give you a ranged attack, without really putting pressure on me to use it right away, meaning outside of burst windows, I can kind of have fun with it, learn the fight and know, hey, I need to move away from the boss, now's the time to do ranged damage. Spamming lots of keys and watching a bar go up isn't making a job harder or easier, nor making it more interesting, but plugging in lots of little small interactions across the entire toolkit will help create that skill gap they're looking for. A rookie Paladin might just click Imperator the moment it's up. A slightly more experienced one will wait till the 2 charges are available under pot window, and an expert who knows both the job and the fight inside and out will know how, and more importantly when, to optimally squeeze 2 counters and imperators inside the pot window without risking the group's safety. Whether that's the moment 2 charges are available or isn't until 2 minutes into the fight. For now, that is all I have to say on the matter. My main point being that simple does not necessarily mean easier nor dumbed down. Sometimes less is more. If this leads to more dynamic fights overall, then I'm all for it. I'm thinking of doing another of these little discussions breaking down the homogenization, as that's a pretty big topic, especially when it comes to tank and mitigations. With off tanks and main tanks hovering over our heads, it is something to potentially look at. If you've enjoyed this and you want more like it, then please like and subscribe, and feel free to discuss away in the comments. It is honestly half the fun of making these, so if you don't, I will be sad. And Xenos, if you see this, please try to keep little Zeems tucked away, would you please? It is getting rather cold out there, you know.
I think it should be harder.
Until next time.